Ever since I bought this house about a year and a half ago, I have been doing a lot of work to it, but nothing that could quite be considered finished. So for once, I just want to do something satisfying and relatively easy so that I can finally call something done. And that something is finally putting together my office. So aside from the fact that it looks like this, the other interesting thing about this office is that technically it's actually a bedroom. It has a very spacious closet and an ensuite bathroom, but for us, it made the most sense to use this already weirdly divided space as separate halves of a home office. But right now, my side of the office has become more of a dumping zone for all of the items I eventually intend to put in here. So the first part of my plan is to move these piles out of the way, get everything covered up, and start by painting this room. So after living here for about a year and a half, I have come to the conclusion that there are basically two types of home improvement. And the first is stuff like this, where it will practically affect your day-to-day life and like maybe even improve it a little. And the second kind is all the invisible stuff, but more important because it prevents your house from falling down or exploding or rotting away or whatever. And the thing that kind of sucks about it is sometimes the stuff you can't see is the most expensive. But thankfully, paint is pretty cheap. So the house flipper gray is finally gone, but the new paint color has made my least favorite part of this room a lot more obvious, which is the popcorn ceilings. I'm not the biggest fan of popcorn ceilings. Luckily, they aren't in every room in the house, but I did strongly consider scraping all of it off. But eventually, I decided against it because the labor, the mess, the time just didn't seem like it would be worth it. But there is a compromise I can try that should at least make the ceiling a little bit less of a focal point. You can kind of see up here that there is already some crown molding on this wall of the room and just this wall only. So in an attempt to keep things uniform and to sort of soften the transition from wall to ceiling, I'm going to try to install molding all around the rest of the room. In order to match the existing molding, I bought this cove molding, which is called that because there's a divot in it. But in order to match it completely, I need to paint it white before I put it up. One more thing. In order to make sure that the cove molding is sitting nicely and flush against the ceiling, I ironically do have to do some scraping. Well, the scraping is done. And now I think I'm moving on to the hard part, which is making sure all these angles are correct before I make the final cuts. Well, this is taking an embarrassingly long time to figure out, and I only have so much material here, so here's the plan. Initially, I thought that the only way to do crown molding was with a miter join, where you cut two pieces at an angle together so that they fit perfectly for the corner. But then I learned about cope molding, which is basically a technique that involves placing one straight piece with no angled cuts and then cutting a specific shape out of the second piece to just fit around the profile of the molding. It's basically cheating, but for some reason I just cannot figure out how to do a proper miter join on these moldings. So in the interest of time and not wasting any more material, I'm going to go ahead and do that instead. This is not really the easiest stuff to put up by yourself, but I'm gonna figure it out. Before I do that though, I did learn that you actually need to caulk the edges of your trim where it meets the wall and the ceiling. So I'm going to add a line of this flexible trim sealant to all of that before I nail everything in. The first piece is up. It's not the neatest looking or the prettiest right now, but I will go back and clean everything up once all of the molding is up. Okay, so last night I let the main piece kind of set in place, which means that I've kind of locked myself in. So now it's time for the hard part because I have to get these next two pieces exactly right. But since those pieces are too long anyways, I've chopped off like a foot from each of them to use as practice before actually cutting into the real thing. And after some nervous cuts, I had my final pieces and it was time to put them up. And after some final paint touch-ups, this is what it looks like. I'm pretty happy with this. It's definitely not perfect if you look super close, but luckily the molding is small, so you can't really tell the mistakes as easily as you might with a super thick, prominent crown molding. So, got away with it this time. I know in camera it probably looks like I barely did anything, but I feel that it gives everything a more office-like, professional vibe. And it feels even more professional now that I've finally been able to set up my new desk in here. Now that the desk is assembled, the room is finally looking and functioning more like an actual office. You can probably tell it's been a while since I've made any huge upgrades last, but I did happen to get myself a new desk chair, which is actually one of those like TikTok chairs that you can sit cross-legged on. And I didn't expect to like it this much, but I love it. So definite improvements are being made, but now it's probably time to do something that I've been avoiding for a while, and that is finally cleaning out and organizing this closet. This is mainly full of just a lot of old electronics, older equipment, and things I don't use as much anymore, but I do want to make sure I have access to this stuff if I do need to dig it out, not to mention a better way to store a few extra items that are worth keeping in an accessible place. Looks worse than when I started, but on my way to putting everything back in the appropriate bins and putting them back in the closet. Okay, so I'm finally actually getting to the fun part, which is decorating the walls. I've already hung up a couple of my smaller items, but it's time to hang up my prized possession, which is this green line sign. I lived in Boston for 10 years, and the majority of those were spent living in an apartment on the green line of the T. I managed to get one of these. No, I didn't steal it, even though everyone thinks I did. it cost me $85. And then since it technically, like, there was no way to hang it on the wall, it was kind of one of my first like DIY projects, figuring out how to put some sort of hook on the back to make it hangable. It's pretty crude, but you can see I basically just put a board cut to size in the little divot of the back of the sign and fixed it in there with some rubber cement and popped some of these heavy duty like fastener hangers on top. And it served me well for a long time, but now it's gonna find a permanent home here. But since then, I think I've gotten slightly more competent at that kind of thing, and I hope that means I can somewhat successfully make myself some shelves for either side of my desk. I found these shelves online, and I really like the look of them, but they're $400 each, which is insane. So I figured maybe I could make my own somewhat shittier but much cheaper version and save myself $800 in the process. And luckily for me, the website even has all of the specs and measurements for the shelves, meaning I can recreate them pretty easily. So I have my two panels cut out. I'm marking one of them off with tape so I can figure out where to place all of the holes, and then I'll cut the dowels. But yeah, this is the one part of doing this that I have to guess on and do a little math on, because obviously there aren't any specs on like how evenly spaced all of the holes are. So I've spent way too long thinking about how they're all supposed to be arranged, and I think I figured it out. So, time to drill. God damn it. The hole is too big for the size of the dowel, so, well, I literally just went back into Home Depot twice in a row, but I have them. I have two of them in case one wears out, since I'm drilling quite a few holes. But yeah, I did a little test hole back here right in the parking lot, so this is definitely gonna be the right size, I swear. Okay. My wrist is in so much pain, but I finally was able to drill every single little hole in the correct size, except for the one on the bottom here, but it's fine. So the shelves are finally basically done, and it's time to go hang them up. And now that the shelves are done, all I have to do is add a few finishing touches, and I can call the office complete. Well, this is it, the final product. I know it's not perfect, but even if there are small imperfections, this room looks a lot better than it did before. About 2 years after moving in, my office is finally done. Took me long enough. But the reason partially that it took me so long was because, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of those more important but less immediately satisfying projects just had to come first. And as important as all those unseen improvements are, it is pretty nice to have an improvement that I can actually enjoy in my day-to-day life. And it's even nicer to be able to finally call a room complete. Considering this took me like 2 years, who knows when I'll be able to do that again.